Lake Huron is the second largest of the Great Lakes by surface area and the third largest by volume. Lake Huron also has the longest shoreline out of the other four Great Lakes, and it has the most islands. But just like the other lakes, Lake Huron has a deadly reputation. Hundreds of ships have met their ends in the waters of Lake Huron, and the vast majority of them remain undiscovered as of the making of this video. Here are 5 horrible shipwrecks on Lake Huron. On the evening of October 19, 1905, Captain John Duddleson of the bulk freighter L.C. Waldo found himself in the midst of a fierce gale on Lake Huron when he spotted another freighter off in the distance. It was the nearly 20-year-old steamer Kaliyuga, barely making headway in the storm. But little did anybody know, this would be the last time anyone would see the Kaliyuga. As of the making of this video, her wreck remains undiscovered. The Kaliyuga was a wooden-hulled ore carrier constructed in 1887 by the Simon Langle Shipyard in St. Clair, Michigan, and was launched on September 24, 1887. She came in at 1,941 gross tons and measured 270 feet or 82 meters in length. She was named after the term Kaliyuga in Hinduism, which refers to the final of 4 ages of the world, which is considered to be the worst of the 4, and it roughly translates to Age of Darkness. In 1892, the Kaliyuga was sold to the Cleveland Iron Mining Company, which operated the vessel until 1901 when she was sold to the St. Clair Steamship Company. However, her 18-year-long career wasn't without incident. On August 5, 1895, while the freighter was sailing through a fog bank in northern Lake Huron, she grounded on Bois Blanc Island. 2 tugboats released the ship the following day. On July 24, 1897, she ran aground on Ballard's Reef in the Detroit River, but she was soon released. Then, on August 4, 1900, while the freighter was towing a barge called the Fontana, the steamer Appomattox was passing by the Kaliyuga while towing a barge called the Santiago. While both barges were undertowed by both freighters, the Fontana collided with the Santiago, and the Fontana quickly sank, killing one of her crew members. And then, just 3 months later, on November 4, 1900, the Kaliyuga ran aground once again in the Detroit River. 3 days later, she was freed by several tugboats. By 1905, there was no way the Kaliyuga could compete with the new steel-hulled lake freighters, but she still played an important role transporting iron ore and other raw materials throughout the region. On the afternoon of October 18, 1905, the Kaliyuga departed Marquette, Michigan with a load of iron ore bound for Erie, Pennsylvania. However, after the freighter passed through the Sioux Locks and entered Lake Huron the next day, a violent gale swept over the lake. Unfortunately for the Kaliyuga, the storm hit only after she reached the open lake, with no safe place nearby for her to ride out the storm. Around 4 p.m., while the Kaliyuga was fighting her way through the storm, she was spotted by the steamer Frontenac, around 7 miles east of Presque Isle, Michigan. Then, around sunset, she was spotted by Captain John Duddleson of the freighter L.C. Waldo, between Middle Island and Thunder Bay Island. Little did anybody know, this would be the last time the Kaliyuga would be seen again. On October 26, a steamer was sailing through Georgian Bay on Lake Huron when they came across the Kaliyuga's pilot house. Several bodies from the ship were found over the next few weeks, but as of the making of this video, the wreck of the Kaliyuga remains undiscovered. There are a lot of theories about how the ship went down, but no one knows for sure, and the story of the Kaliyuga is mostly forgotten today. The Great Lakes Storm of 1913 is by far the deadliest storm in the history of the Great Lakes. 19 ships went down in the storm, and 19 others were stranded in the storm. Over 270 sailors lost their lives. Lake Huron experienced the worst of the storm. Over the course of just a few hours on November 9, 1913, Lake Huron claimed 8 ships and the lives of nearly 180 sailors. Perhaps the most remarkable shipwreck during the storm was the bulk freighter Isaac M. Scott. Labeled Yard Number 369, the Isaac M. Scott was constructed in 1909 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio for the Virginia Steamship Company, based in Cleveland. The vessel was launched on June 12, 1909, and was completed in early July. She came in at 6,372 gross tons and measured 504 feet or 154 meters in length. She entered service on July 2, 1909, but on her maiden voyage, she ran into trouble. On July 12, 1909, while sailing through a heavy fog bank on Whitefish Bay, she collided with the ore carrier John B. Cowell. The Scott tore a massive hole in the side of the Cowell, and the ship rapidly sank, killing 14 out of the 24 people on board the Cowell. The bow of the Scott was heavily damaged following the collision, but she was repaired and returned to service. But just a few years later, the ship would meet her own tragic fate. In the pre-dawn hours of November 9, 1913, the Isaac M. Scott, under the command of Captain Archie MacArthur, departed Cleveland with a load of coal bound for Milwaukee. She and several other ships soon left the St. Clair River and entered Lake Huron, but then the crew of the Scott found themselves sailing through the worst of the storm which had been raging for the past several days. On the afternoon of November 9th, as the Isaac M. Scott entered Lake Huron, she was spotted by Captain A.C. May of the freighter H.B. Hoggett, which ended up grounding on the beach at Port Edward, Ontario near the mouth of the St. Clair River, but luckily the Hoggett survived the storm. Captain May was the last person to see the Isaac M. Scott for over 6 decades. After the storm cleared, debris from the ship and bodies of the ship's crew washed ashore on the Canadian side of Lake Huron. None of the 27 crew on board the Scott survived, but the ship was just one of several ships claimed by Lake Huron during the storm. The wreck of the Isaac M. Scott was discovered in 1976 by diver Kent Bell Richard about 6 miles north of Thunder Bay Island, lying upside down in over 200 feet of water at the bottom of Lake Huron. Just 2 days after the loss of the Isaac M. Scott, another vessel went down on Lake Huron during the storm of 1913. The bulk freighter Hydrus was also sailing through Lake Huron with a load of iron ore when the storm hit. Labeled hull number 327, the freighter was constructed in 1903 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio for the Gilchrist Transportation Company. When she was launched on September 12, 1903, she was originally named the R.E. Shuck, after one of the founders of the Gilchrist Transportation Company, Randall E. Shuck. She came in at 4,713 gross tons and measured 436 feet or 133 meters in length. In 1913, the R.E. Shuck was sold to the Interlake Steamship Company and renamed Hydrus. On November 11, 1913, the Hydrus was sailing through Lake Huron with a cargo of iron ore from Duluth bound for Cleveland. She was sailing not far from another vessel, the Canadian freighter James Carruthers, which also went down the storm. And soon, the Hydrus disappeared in the storm. Not a single one of the 24 crew on board the Hydrus survived. On top of that, her sister ship, the Argus, also went down on Lake Huron with all hands during the storm of 1913. And for more than a century, the final resting place of the Hydrus remained unknown. The wreck of the Hydrus was discovered in 2015 by shipwreck hunter David Schroeder, sitting upright at the bottom of Lake Huron. Unfortunately, the Hydrus was just one of many ships claimed by the lakes during the storm of 1913, and not a single survivor from any of those ships lived to tell the tale. In 1892, the Cleveland Shipbuilding Company began construction on 2 nearly identical freighters for the Lake Superior Iron Company. One of them would be named the Choctaw, after the Southeast Native American tribe, and the other would be named the Ondaste, which is the French word for the Susquehannock people. At the time of their construction, whaleback freighters were becoming very common on the Great Lakes. These 2 ships would combine the whaleback design with a standard bow, or in other words, they were semi-whaleback freighters. However, this design never caught on, and only 3 of these types of ships were ever built. The Ondaste was launched on March 24, 1892, and the Choctaw was launched a few months later on May 25th. Both ships came in at 1,574 gross tons, and both measured 270 feet or 82 meters in length. The Choctaw sailed her maiden voyage in June of 1892, and in 1894, she and her sister ship were sold to the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company, and her early career was relatively uneventful. But then, in May of 1896, she collided with the freighter L.C. Waldo, and partially sank near the Sioux Locks, but luckily she was refloated and repaired. But then, in 1900 and 1902, she ran aground and partially sank, but both times she was repaired and returned to service. On November 9, 1913, the Choctaw was docked in Marquette, Michigan, when her captain, Charles Fox, realized the signs of what would become the storm of 1913. That same day, he saw the ill-fated Henry B. Smith depart Marquette Harbor before she was lost with all hands in the storm. But less than 2 years later, the Choctaw would meet her own fate. On July 11, 1915, the Choctaw was carrying a load of coal from Cleveland bound for Marquette. After the ship passed through the St. Clair River and entered Lake Huron, a heavy fog bank descended over the freighter. Despite the fact that visibility was poor, Captain Fox did not order her speed reduced, and she continued full ahead. This was because, like many captains on the Great Lakes, Captain Fox of the Choctaw was under enormous pressure to deliver their cargo as quickly as possible no matter what. At the same time, another vessel, the 230-foot Canadian freighter Wakanda, was carrying a load of wheat from Fort William, Ontario bound for Montreal, when she found herself in the midst of a heavy fog bank. Her captain, Cornelius Deneen, was under the same pressure as Captain Fox of the Choctaw. At roughly 4:30 a.m. on the morning of July 12th, Captain Deneen was summoned to the bridge. When he arrived, his first mate reported that they heard the whistle of another ship in the fog, and it sounded close. The captain sounded 3 short blasts from the Wakanda's whistle, which the other ship answered. This repeated several more times until Captain Deneen realized that the ship was likely in their path. He ordered the engines full astern and turned the wheel hard to starboard, before suddenly the Choctaw emerged from the fog. and the Wakanda smashed into the other freighter between her first two cargo hatches. Soon the two ships parted from one another, and the Choctaw disappeared into the fog. Luckily, the Wakanda was not in danger of sinking, and the crew of the freighter searched for the Choctaw. Soon they heard the screams of men in the fog, before suddenly they saw the Choctaw with her stern rising out of the water as she foundered by the head. Captain Fox of the Choctaw almost immediately ordered an abandoned ship. The Choctaw had developed a portless as her bow sank beneath the surface. She soon rolled over onto her starboard side, and her stern briefly lifted out of the water before she slipped below the surface of Lake Huron. The Choctaw sank in only 17 minutes, but luckily all of her 22 crew survived and were picked up by the Wakanda. Following the disaster, the owners of the Choctaw filed a lawsuit against the owners of the Wakanda, claiming that the Wakanda was responsible for the collision. But it was pointed out that the Choctaw was sailing at full speed during the collision, and they did not correctly respond to the warnings from the Wakanda. And soon the court found both vessels equally at fault. Unfortunately, the Choctaw's sister ship, the Ondaste, met her own fate less than 15 years later. On September 9, 1929, the ship was carrying a load of gravel from Ferrysburg, Michigan, bound for Chicago, when she was lost with all hands in a storm on Lake Michigan. The wreck of the Choctaw was discovered in May of 2017 by members of the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, nearly 102 years after she went down. The wreck lies on her starboard side at a depth of around 300 feet at the bottom of Lake Huron. However, the wreck of her sister ship, the Ondaste, remains undiscovered as of the making of this video. Just a few years after the loss of the Choctaw, another vessel went down on Lake Huron in very similar circumstances. Labeled hull number 346, the DR Hanna was constructed in 1906 by the American Shipbuilding Company in Lorain, Ohio for the Pioneer Steamship Company based in Cleveland. She was launched on October 20, 1906 and entered service on November 12. She was one of the largest freighters on the lakes at the time. She measured 552 feet or 168 meters in length and came in at 7,023 gross tons. She was operated by a crew of 31. Her early career was relatively uneventful, but then, on September 1, 1910, the Hanna collided with the steamer Harvey H. Brown. Luckily, both ships survived the collision, but the Brown was so heavily damaged that she did not sail for the rest of the shipping season. Then, on October 13, 1915, while the Hanna was entering Cleveland Harbor, her foremast was knocked over by the Superior Avenue high-level bridge. Her foremast was replaced in Detroit. On May 19, 1916, the Hanna ran aground on the St. Mary's River near Little Rapids Cut, after her steering equipment failed. Then, on September 6, 1918, the Hanna ran aground on Detour Shoal on Lake Huron while carrying a load of iron ore, but luckily she was once again freed and returned to service. On May 16, 1919, the DR Hanna was carrying a load of 377,000 bushels of wheat from Duluth bound for Buffalo, New York, when she was overtaken by a dense fog bank on Lake Huron. At the same time, another vessel, the freighter Quincy A. Shaw, was sailing upbound on Lake Huron with a cargo of coal, when they also found themselves in heavy fog. Soon, the crew of the Quincy A. Shaw noticed the DR Hanna directly in their path, and soon, the Shaw collided with the Hanna, and the Hanna quickly rolled over and sank. Fortunately, all of her crew survived the sinking, but the Hanna was declared a total loss. The wreck of the Hanna rests upside down in roughly 135 feet of water at the bottom of Lake Huron, and is one of the largest wrecks at the bottom of Lake Huron. And today, the story of the Hanna is all but forgotten. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll never miss any new uploads from this channel. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.